if those drones actually ended up killing a lot of people on the ground, if those MiG-31s that were in Estonian airspace were actually armed and were taking out a mission, then NATO would be reacting very differently. They would now be dealing with the consequences of military action. The threats have to be dealt with robustly, and this is something that NATO has yet to properly wake up to.
Now, the Prime Minister has joined a meeting of European leaders in Copenhagen, which is being dominated by discussions on how to counter the threat from Russia. Security's been stepped up in Copenhagen and all civilian drone flights have been banned after Denmark became the latest NATO country to face drone incursions which closed several of its airports. The Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, warned that Europe is in a hybrid war waged by Russia. A short time ago, I spoke to military analyst Sean Bell, former Air Vice Marshal in the RAF, who joined me from Kyiv. And I asked him whether the Danish Prime Minister was right in the way that she described the threat.
The fact remains that Russia has attacked NATO. We've seen 19 drones go into Poland. We've seen a number go into Romania. We've seen 3 MiG-31s go into Estonian airspace. And bluntly, NATO seems to be rushing around trying to work out what to do about it. It was 10 years ago that Turkey had 2 Russian aircraft fly towards its airspace. One came in and they shot it down. It caused a diplomatic incident, but never since that day, 10 years ago, has any Russian aircraft gone into Turkish airspace. It's about time now that NATO sorted out the political angle to make sure it has a robust response to Russia, because President Putin is clearly feeling emboldened. Unless NATO does something, it will continue.
And there's been drone activity over Copenhagen, forcing shutdowns just last week. The Russians have denied that they're involved. But do you think that was very likely to have been a further attempt by Russia to threaten Denmark, to threaten Copenhagen as it prepares to host this summit?
It might have been. The trouble is, I think the danger is today that everything that happens, we sort of draw a line back to Russia. And I think we've got to, as a former military guy, I think we've got to be a bit more objective than that. I think I speak to you now from Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. They had the biggest attack here a few days ago. And when I talk to the Ukrainians about what's going on, they are just pretty clear that Putin is not going to stop unless he's forced to stop. At the moment, we've got America looking a little bit wobbly because President Trump's policy towards Ukraine seems to change a lot. And if Ukraine is to fall, that puts incredible pressure on Europe. It becomes a lot more vulnerable. And I think European leaders, away from the news items about drones over airports that might or might not be Russians, have got some profound decisions to make about whether to stop Putin in his tracks or whether to allow him to continue and see what implications that has for our global security.
And I will talk a bit more about what EU nations might decide when it comes to further support for Ukraine. But just in terms of those EU and NATO countries that have been threatened, as you mentioned, Poland, Estonia, Denmark itself, do you think that NATO should, as Turkey did, start to shoot down drones that intrude into NATO airspace?
I think we've got very used to the sort of post-Cold War era where nobody has threatened us and we politically are paranoid about the word escalation. If you've got Russia that has clearly made its intent clear, it's invaded Ukraine, it has caused widespread casualties, destroyed communities, and is continuing a 3.5-year war so far, if those armed aircraft go into NATO airspace, there should be a very, very clear response. At the moment, we seem to be allowing President Putin to box us as we have both our hands tied in the corner. It's not escalation, it's matching, and all we are doing is making sure we are robust. I spent a lifetime in the military. The military never wants to fight, but the better trained it is, the more robust it is, the more it deters aggression. If you don't deter aggression, if you don't deter a bully, he keeps coming at you. And this is a profound change in approach that NATO will need to take to actually stop Russia's aggression continuing.
But clearly there are concerns, aren't there, within those NATO countries that if they do directly start to shoot down any of these drones, Russian jets we've even had over Polish airspace, then that is leading NATO into direct confrontation with Russia.
I absolutely appreciate it. I've got a lot of grey hairs on my head. I've been around this for quite a while. let's look at it through the other lens. If those drones actually ended up killing a lot of people on the ground, if those MiG-31s that were in Estonian airspace were actually armed and were taking out a mission, then NATO would be reacting very differently. They would now be dealing with the consequences of military action. The threats have to be dealt with robustly, and this is something that NATO has yet to properly wake up to. President Putin's aggression into Ukraine, we fully expected we will not see another global war in Europe anytime in our lifetime. It is here, and therefore the question is, how do we stop Putin making this much, much worse? How do we stop it spreading across border Europe? And the main way to do it as a military professional is to be very robust, to stand tall, to take a couple of punches, but then throw a punch back, because that's the only way that President Putin will respect NATO's strength and avoid further escalation.
What about this idea of a drone wall? I mean, is that realistic? And how could it possibly work?
Well, it made me chuckle when I first heard about it, because it's a classic political response. You know, how do we make our defences more robust? The problem is there are lots of very clever ways to defeat drones, but if you demonstrate to Putin how you're going to defeat his drones, he will very quickly adapt and find ways to get through it. We have to be very careful. We should be doing these sort of capabilities behind dark curtains, a skunk works, as it were. What Russia's done very badly in the war is it's showcased things like its Kinzhal, its hypersonic missile, declaring that nobody else in the world had one and it was undefeatable, I quote President Putin. In fact, by showcasing it, NATO now knows how to shoot those down. We've got to be really careful to put our capabilities on display, because all we do is demonstrate our vulnerability. I think in principle, we've absolutely got to focus on what we're going to do, not only in warfare, but also for terrorism. If you imagine a drone going in, or a series of drones going into Wembley Stadium or Twickenham, just imagine the carnage that would be caused. I think we have to work out how we're going to do that. But a drone wall, I do not believe, is the answer.
Well, that was the military analyst and former Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell speaking to me a little earlier from Kyiv.
After the latest drone incursion, we have had conversations in NATO as part of the consultations on Article 4 that were requested by Poland at that time, but by Estonia later on. And Romania has put forward our own list of requests in that sense. We are confident on the current capacity to both deter this type of intrusions, but also defend ourselves. In the same time, we believe it is strategic for the eastern flank to be better protected, especially in air defense. So what we're doing in that direction is to also create the partnerships needed, for example, with Ukraine, to build defensive drones for the future. There are discussions around common production facilities, production capacities in Romania. Because what we're looking at together with Ukraine is to use the know-how that they now have in circumstances that are impossible to replicate, and to build the defensive capacity that we need, not just for Romania, but also as an offering for other EU and NATO countries. The United States as well has recently announced a procurement decision for such drones. We believe in our capacity to make it a reality fast, because it is quite clear that when we speak of the increased budgets allocated to defense within NATO, it's not just a matter of the amount of money that are to be invested, but it's also a matter of time. So we believe that production needs to be accelerated. Romania has a long-standing strategic partnership with the United States, and the defense security part of it is absolutely key. So our President Nicu Șordan has informed the Parliament on Romania's decision to allow for an increased US presence in the NATO military bases in Romania. Specifically, one element is the air fueling, which is needed as well in the case of a reaction needed in the volatile Middle East situation. We already act as a training base for F-16 Ukrainian pilots in an international team that is based in Romania, and we want to continue and increase the capacity to support both allied forces and Ukraine to have better equipped human personnel trained in that direction. In the sense of the common airspace, for example, and also the no-fly zone, that was a proposal that was being discussed in recent days. Romania has a National Security Council decision that we do not act outside our own territory, and that is the current decision that we are staying on.
I don't know if you want to stay in touch after this, that would be really.
No one is excited about anything that has to do with war, but it's very clear to us that the air defenses need to be increased. We currently have the capacity to defend ourselves, but we need to also create the proper discouragement, the proper deterrence for the future as well. And we are supporters and part of the Eastern Sentry initiative in the NATO format to increase the air defense on the eastern flank. And for us, it's very important to clarify that the support for the eastern flank needs to go to the Black Sea.
Yes.
Very clearly, and also in the European Union format, the increase on the drone wall, the increase of budgets are also directions very important for Romania.
And also with Andrei, we're working, but yeah, you can have my phone number as well.
Excellent.
Romania is very positive on the US request that all the NATO members cut off from Russian gas, Russian energy sources. We have taken that decision for some time now, and we believe that the US proposal that all countries that are part of NATO, all countries that are part of EU, join that decision, stop creating a profit for Russia, a profit that is used to finance war on Russia's side, is the right way to go.